Can you hear me now? Would you like me to start again? Welcome to Broadland District Council Cabinet, 14th of January 2025. This meeting will be live streamed and it is a public meeting, and you will find it on the Council's YouTube channel. Item 1, declarations of interest. Do members here have any interest to declare? No, thank you very much. Apologies for absence. Could I have any apologies for absence, James, please?
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Harpley and Councillor Riley and Councillor Nick Starling.
Thank you very much. In that case, that will take me on to the minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 10th of December 2024. Is everybody happy with those minutes? Does anybody have anything they wish to draw to our attention if we assume that they are correct for accuracy, and do we have any matters arising if they're not on this agenda? We're all happy with those. Okay, thank you very much. Public speaking. Do we have any members of the public who have requested to speak at the meeting, James?
There's no public.
In that case, I will move to Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I believe, as you've been told, the chairman of Overview and Scrutiny, he's actually on his way to London at the moment, so unfortunately he can't be with us. I believe that the recommendations were all accepted in full, so I don't think there's any major issues from that, but there will be some representations from non-cabinet members, I'm sure, who may wish to raise something themselves. Okay. In that case, I'll move to item 6, which does bring us to the representations from non-cabinet members, and I can see Martin is here. Would you like to add anything, Martin?
Thank you. Yes, obviously at Overview and Scrutiny, whilst everything was nodded through, there were just a couple of things on item 7, the Norfolk Strategic Planning Framework. Whilst it was agreed that it was good and proper to have the protocol in place, the effectiveness of the NHS to actually deal with it was questioned. There was also a question around the the adult social care not being included as part of it, which, given that Norfolk is pear-shaped but upside down, they felt it should. The items prior to the exclusion of the press and public, everything else is said was agreed to go forward, and then there is something on item 13 which I'll do outside, if I may.
In that case, well, just as a brief response, I would actually point out that it's quite difficult actually to direct the health service to do anything. I think we'll come to that point in a minute anyway, but that is one of the things I think we would all agree is not our remit, fortunately or unfortunately. And the social care, I don't believe actually comes into this remit either, but I will defer to Adam when he gets to that point, which in fact brings me on, of course, to that is your report, Adam. So if you'd like to give us a lowdown on that one, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, to briefly introduce the protocol, it does involve the local planning authorities of Norfolk working with NHS organisations and public health in a collaborative way. The protocol has been around for a decade now, and this represents an update of this document. It focuses around our work on our local planning function, and also creates a framework where planning consultations on planning applications are sent to the Integrated Care Board for them to be a single point to respond to those. Highlights in the report note the thresholds for when those consultations would be triggered. So, for example, on larger applications of 50 or more dwellings. There's also details in there on some of the metrics the NHS use to make their comments, and finally in the recommendations you'll note that there are two, which is to note that we are working to embed this working relationship through spatial planning and the health and NHS teams, and the recommendation is to endorse the revised protocol.
Does anybody have any comments they'd like to make on that before we go any further?
It's just an observation that it's really important that we have this protocol, and that health certainly does have this input into planning, because as we know, we have a real pressure on services, and so I'm reading the report. It looks like it's very much up to the Integrated Care Board and the Public Health team at Norfolk County Council to input, and so hopefully they will do in a way that does influence. For example, just location of GP surgeries, and taking into account the numbers that we require within Norfolk. So it's good to have this, and as has been observed, we just need to ensure that it's applied and utilised.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to say something? Dan?
It's a classic comment rather than a question, really, in terms of we've said before about how little power we've got in terms of influencing health and the services that are delivered. If it wasn't for having protocols such as this, we would have even less power and influence. So it's an absolute no-brainer that we should proceed.
Stuart?
Yes, Chair, just to agree with that, but also to note on page 29 that there is a map of the county and indeed North Suffolk, North East Suffolk, which actually shows that the health services are actually being provided across the county boundary.
Yes, thank you. And I think that's in part, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that in part to do with the way the health service is structured?
That's exactly right. So it's the Norfolk and Waveney ICB, so it does include that southern part of Waveney.
But well spotted, Stuart. We've included a bit of Suffolk. So thank you for that. I would also make the point, of course, that we very often forget, don't we, that GPs, of course, are actually effectively private businesses. So, that's another issue about, we don't have any influence over how many GPs we can have, but what we can do, and I think that's what this protocol helps us to achieve, is to ensure that those, where we can, we might be able to provide buildings and so on, which would actually help support people get into that area and be a GP, where they might otherwise not be able to afford to do that. So I think the planning and health protocol helps actually work out how many we might need and whether this is sustainable, but it might also give us the opportunity to press for other services and other things to be incorporated in those developments, which will help to increase the number of GPs longer term, I would hope. Is that a reasonable thing to hope? In that case, I don't think there's really, it's nice that we're all working across various councils to do this, so I think it's quite important, and as you say, it's quite a long-term thing. So if I take us to the recommendations, can I assume that we are all therefore happy to note the approach to embedding health and wellbeing in spatial planning and to endorse the revised planning and health protocol? Yes, lovely, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so now this brings us to item 8, which is the green infrastructure. Now I'm going to say this very carefully. The green infrastructure recreation avoidance mitigation strategy, which I think in future we're going to call GIRAMS, is that how we say it? Which is much easier, isn't it? It's an action plan and the governance that goes with it. So Adam, perhaps you'd give us the detail, thank you.
So in summary, Chair, the concept of GIRAMS has been around for a while. It was actually introduced in 2020, and this sets out a detailed regime of how that tariff, which is already being collected, will be spent. The concept behind it is to protect Norfolk's most important natural habitats from the pressure of visitor pressure and through recreation, litter, various other trampling, fire risk, those kind of factors. That visitor pressure will obviously increase as we see more homes developed, and by paying the tariff, that will pay for projects which then can mitigate the impact on the county's most important habitats. The recommendations themselves are to increase the existing tariff from £221 to £293. That's as a result of the GIRAM's action plan, which has been produced by a consultancy called Footprint Ecology. So that costs out the cost of producing those mitigations against the number of homes that we're expecting to be built in Norfolk over the next 22 years. That gives us the higher tariff of £293. In order to oversee the spending of those monies, we're proposing that a RAMS board is established with elected member representation on it, and to provide the support and secretariat function to that board, we're proposing the employment of a project manager that would be paid for from tariff contributions. Through discussions with partner authorities, we've reached the proposal where that officer would be employed by Norwich City Council. The City Council already has joint working relationships established for the Norfolk Planning Authority, so this proposal is taking advantage of those structures which have already been embedded for the last decade. The final recommendation deals with that elected member representation onto the RAMS board, but as you'll appreciate, that has already been dealt with under the monitoring officer's report of last year, and Councillor Beadle has been appointed to that board.
Lovely, thank you very much. Yes, anybody got any comments they'd like to make on this report?
Thanks, Adam. If I can just clarify, the fees have been based on the expected numbers of properties to be developed within this time period, but it does recognise that nutrient neutrality may delay some of those developments. So, in terms of, I suppose, on what basis is the fee? Does the fee take into account the nutrient neutrality, perhaps delays or whatever? I'm thinking about cash flow as well in terms of how that would work.
So the £22 million, which the projects would cost, has been divided across the number of homes we're expected across Norfolk, which is 76,000. We've used the figures from the Greater Norwich Local Plan, which is a total of 45,000. That figure of 45,000 was based on the examination process we went through during 2023, and that examination process took into account the impacts of nutrient neutrality as they were at that time.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions they'd like to raise or comments they would like to make? No? I think what I would draw your attention to is at 2.4, it's quite interesting that this approach that we've been taking in Norfolk here has actually been adopted in other places as well, which does go to show actually how well it's working, I think. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with the proposal to bring forward somebody to manage this, so I'm more than happy to support it. So if I therefore take us to the recommendations, which are to increase the existing green infrastructure and recreational impact avoidance and mitigation strategy from £221.17 to £293.53 per property. Number 2 is the employment of a delivery manager funded through tariff contributions who will report to the Norfolk Recreational Avoidance to GIRAM's board. Okay. Or the RAMS board. And item 3, we know we have already appointed Councillor Beadle to that board, so that one is a given. Are we all happy to do that? Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you, and I think, Adam, I'm right in saying you're probably going to do the next one as well.
Last one for me, yes. This is the self and custom build supplementary planning document, so it builds upon the policies in the Greater Norwich Local Plan. Supplementary planning documents don't create new planning policy, but they enable us to give clear guidance to applicants, to planning officers on how to deal with planning applications. Key points to note about this is the supplementary planning document builds on two of the policies in the Greater Norwich Local Plan, those being Policy 5 and Policy 7.5. Policy 5 seeks that proposals of 40 dwellings or more should provide at least 5% of those plots for self and custom build. And Policy 7.5 deals with self and custom build proposals of up to 3 dwellings within, next to or adjacent to settlement boundaries, but not necessarily those settlements with a settlement boundary. We're seeking approval to conduct a consultation on this. We're expecting a wide range of interests, both from the development industry and private individuals who may aspire to self-build. In terms of the update to Cabinet, I'd just like to note that we had originally envisaged that we'd go out to consultation in mid-January. Obviously, we're at that stage now. So what we'd like to do is to get this consultation out as soon as practically possible. And also following a discussion amongst officers, we'd like to extend the consultation from 4 weeks to 6 weeks. This would give more people the opportunity to respond, and we do anticipate a good degree of interest in this document.
Lovely, thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to make on this one?
Just to say, I'm happy to propose this, Chair. It's not as wide-ranging as the other items on the agenda, as this is just restricted to the Broadland District Council area. But nevertheless, it is important to us, and yeah, it's basically a procedural process where this we're recommending to full council.
Anybody else got any comments they'd like to make? No? Well, thank you, Stuart. I think that's fair to say. So I think what we're saying then is we are happy to recommend to council that the draft custom and self-build housing supplementary planning document can go out to a publication, to a public consultation. And number 2, we are happy to sign off any minor amendments if for the Director of Planning, Assistant Director of Planning with portfolio holder for planning as appropriate. I think that's reasonable. So we'll be sending that to council as soon as practically possible. Are we all happy to agree that? Thank you very much. Lovely. Thank you very much. You've only got one tonight, Richard. There, the rechargeable repairs policy. Okay, would you like to give us the detail? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you're aware, as you've just pointed out, I've been here quite a lot recently, working through our registered provider policies to make sure we've got the infrastructure in place. Once I felt we were ready, I volunteered for an external audit, and unfortunately they found one gap, and that is this policy. That's the only reason I haven't put this through with all the other policies I've been going through. Whilst the council has always recharged residents when it has caused damage, which is their responsibility to address, we have not had a focused policy on accommodation. The policy seeks to reach the balance between residents being afforded the opportunity to address repairs, whilst also making sure that those who cannot or cannot afford to do so within the required timeframes will not cause health and safety concerns to them or anyone else in that property. The further key aspects of the policies can be found in 4.1 of the report, which is quite a long list, so I'm not going to read it out if that's okay. And with permission, I'd like to move on to the recommendation, which is for Cabinet to recommend to Council the adoption of the appended rechargeable repairs policy. Thank you very much.
I think that's fine. Anybody got any comments they want to make on that? I think we're covering the same basis of we have done with all of those things where they're rechargeable, we're cost recovery only, and etc. etc. Yes. I don't think there's any dispute that this is a good way forward, so I'm more than happy to accept that recommendation. which I will just reiterate if I can find it again. There we go. So all we're doing is recommending to council they adopt the rechargeable repairs policy. Are we all happy to agree that? Lovely, thank you very much. So this brings us to item 11, which is the forward plan, which you'll find on page 203. Do we want to make any comments on that forward plan? Does anybody have anything they would like to say about it, other than, blimey, there's quite a lot on there? Bear with me, I'm just going to have another flick through. I don't think there's anything that I thought we ought to kind of particularly pull forward. I do think we've got quite a lot coming forward, so that's actually a good thing and a bad thing. There's a lot to do, but it does mean that we are getting on with a lot of stuff. So thank you very much for that. Yes.
Just to note the Norfolk Strategic Planning Framework, Planning in Health and Protocol. Bearing in mind we've just been through an item on this tonight, and it comes under your strategic portfolio. In actual fact, it's actually down as portfolio holder for planning.
Yes, that is a good point. Yes, and it does get a bit confusing, doesn't it? If it's strategic planning, that's me. If it's other planning, that's you. I think, to be fair, we're all going to agree that was just probably an oversight. So I accept that should have been me. Sorry about that. I didn't notice, but I take your point. So perhaps we could get that clarified and amended at some point. That brings us on then to the exclusion of the press and public. I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business, because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006 would be disclosed to them.